Welcome to An Awful World, but not awful like you think.
This is the show where we discuss whether we would have discovered important advances in a world exclusively full of Haylies and Libbys. I'm Haylie.
And I'm Libby.
And this is Timekeeping Part 2.
Part 2. So if you're listening to this and you're like, wait, what? Part 1, stop what you're doing. You need to go listen to Part 1, or you're not going to know anything about where the word clock came from or the Egyptians and the Babylonians.
And if you don't know any of that, you also wouldn't know that we have a special guest today.
Yay!
This is our first time with a guest on the podcast.
We're so excited.
So excited. We're having someone enter a world full of Haylies and Libbys who isn't Haylie or Libby.
Ooh, can't wait to find out. Now, just for today, and today only. No, I'm kidding, because I suspect we'll have this guest back. It's an off-halt world.
Oh, that's right.
Because our special guest is
Ty.
Ty, who is more than just our special guest. He's also our lovely producer, our person who makes all the things work, and who has all of the skills to advertise and all sorts of things. He's lovely. Welcome, Ty.
Hi. Thanks for having me on.
Yay, thanks for being on.
Yes. And now Ty is here with us specifically because he is a watch enthusiast.
A connoisseur.
Yes. So
Yeah, I think that should be clear. I am definitely not like a expert necessarily on like watches or timekeeping or anything. Like I definitely just have a love for it and an appreciation for the craft. And so even behind the scenes, just us talking about like, oh yeah, let's do this timekeeping episode. We gotta talk watches.
Ty was hyped to talk about watches.
Yes.
In an awful world, you certainly would be an expert. Because I think Ty is going to explain to us a little bit today how watches work, which is necessary because I don't know. And as I was reading about it, I messaged Haylie and Ty and I was like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. I think Ty should just explain it to me.
Yeah. And because here's the thing, in a world full of Haylies and Libbys, would we get to the watch?
So the watch relies on a lot of mechanical things and later electrical things. Not confident about either of those things, at least from the Libby's perspective.
You know, the Haylies aren't really grasping it either. There's something called a balance spring. And there's quartz.
Ty's shaking his head, so we know the buzzwords.
Yeah. So take it away, Ty. Let's get into clocks and watches. Because now here's my first question, and I don't know that you know, because again, you are not like a clock watch expert. You're just a watch enthusiast. You just like them a lot, things like that. Is a watch just a really small clock?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I wasn't sure if they were going to like
if the mechanics were the same.
Yeah. So
now I think there are different types of watches
there
and
definitely
clocks that
are.
work differently. How do they work differently? That's why you're here, Ty.
Exactly.
Well, and I think you talk about it a little bit in the part 1. If you haven't watched that, you should definitely go back and watch that. But that timekeeping is not very old. I mean, watching the stars and whether they're aligned or not, right? Like, in other than having like your sunset, your sun, and tracking the sun and things like that. Like the concept of actually using time to measure is only like the last 200-300 years.
Yeah.
It might even be younger than that. I know at least the 1800s.
Yeah. Especially on such a personal level, right?
Oh, for sure.
Like for that to not be like a community thing where it's like there's one big clock in the community. Like we're taking it to this is something that you have with you all the time. Very new idea as far as I understand.
Yeah, very new idea. And I mean, originally, so you think about like grandfather clocks and things like that, but actually like smaller watches and clocks that you would keep on your person started with like pocket watches.
Yes.
They were larger in scope. And the thing that just drives I can't quite come to grips with in my brain is like how they could produce in like the 1800s these small little parts made of steel or whatever they made them out of, and then be able to like put them in something and use physics and whatever to figure out how it is. Because I mean, really, the mechanical watch, there are quartz watches too, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But mechanical watches they're just using energy. It's just physics that actually makes them work. But the fact that they could produce these tiny little gears and things like that and then put it all together to actually make it work it's just crazy.
Now, really quick, because I did do a little research into clocks and watches, before even the pocket watch, the portable watches were on a chain around your neck.
Flava Flav.
Exactly. I immediately was like, Flava Flav, just throwing it back so far. He was like, this was a trend.
A real OG.
That's
honestly.
right.
Well, it's funny that you say that because I did also some research about watches and clocks and all of that, of course. And I have some interesting things to say. But like at the height of 19th century mass clock and watch production, which I was reading about this specific factory that was I think it was in Boston. I can't confirm. It doesn't matter. The point is they were and it was so amazing. At one point they were creating 100 watches a week. And I was like, oh, okay. But then we're impressed. We're impressed by this. Okay. Yes. Good. That is literally the pieces to make them, and they're so small, and to put them all together, it took a lot of time. And so for a whole factory of people to be turning out 100 watches a week, in the 19th century, pretty impressive, honestly.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And now I know that Ty has this little device, and I know that you've brought it today, that you can kind of fiddle around with and take apart and put back together for watch building and things like that. And I've seen those pieces and they are tiny.
They're so tiny.
They're so tiny. He has a little, it looks like a little monocle.
Like a little loop.
Yeah, like a jewelry loop kind of thing. And to see the pieces, because they're so tiny.
Yeah. Yeah. So I brought a couple of goodies in today. I brought a couple of my own personal watches just so that Libby and Haylie can kind of look at them and things like that too. But we'll kind of talk about it as kind of we're talking about it. But one thing that I really got interested in was, how does a mechanical watch work? Because I understand, a lot of mechanical watches, you have to wind it, but what does that actually mean? And what is it that actually makes the watch work? So I purchased, it's kind of like a pocket watch size. It's essentially the mechanism that goes inside the watch. It's often referred to as the movement. Sorry, could not think about that. It's often referred to as the movement. So when somebody talks about the movement, whether it's being made by Rolex or whatever, luxury or whoever, if it's mechanical in nature, then yes, it has the gears and everything. There's no actual power source, like a battery necessarily that's powering it and making it work. It's all just physics. But this essentially is a practice tool. So you can take tweezers and the loop or the little monocle thing, and you can take it apart and put it back together. And I know that sounds kind of dumb, but I mean, if you like Legos,
that's not
right?
dumb.
It's kind of the same. It's kind of the same.
Yeah, to
concept,
understand
right?
how something works.
Yeah.
Take it apart and put it back together.
And I will tell you, it is incredibly frustrating.
I can only imagine.
Because while the pieces are very small, they're also very light and very delicate. And if you squeeze the pinchers, if you squeeze the tweezers too tight and that piece slips and it'll bounce out of your room, and good luck trying to find that
I
carpet.
swear to you, it's like a game of Operation.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Where you're just oh my God, if I can't get this wishbone out of this fucking man's body.
Oh yeah. I've dropped a piece in the carpet and it took me 2 days to find it.
And you're it's gone forever.
I'm on the floor with my flashlight and I'm slowly going over the carpet.
It has to be
And
here.
Haylie walks in and I'm you can't tell me this is the most embarrassing thing you
look like a crazy person. It's not here.
Yeah. She's just what are you doing? Now, mind you, I broke this. That's why it's for practice rather than actually taking apart a real watch. So it's not actually working, but I brought a couple of my other personal watches, and I have one that's a mechanical watch. And
can you see the stuff on the back?
You can. Yeah.
That's the best.
It has what's called an exhibition case back. So it's got a sapphire crystal on the backside. Yeah. And so you can actually see through it. And this one's actually working. I'm actually going to get this one wound so that it's starting to work and things like that. But essentially, I mean, look, whenever you look at the watch, so yes, you have all the gears and things, and they are made very specific with the amount of teeth and things that go around to gauge the time of day. So your 24 hours, your 60 hours a minute, or 60 minutes to an hour and things like that. But essentially, a watch is ran by a spring. There's a very, very long spring.
The balance spring, right?
No. There's multiple springs in a watch. And so
it's the only one I know.
Yeah, so this is the main spring is actually in like a little case because it protects it. But whenever a watch is wound and it's running, what happens is that spring is completely like wound up and it gets tighter.
Yeah.
So as you turn like the crown or you wind a watch, what's happening is those gears are turning and it's actually winding that spring tighter and tighter.
So it's like one of those like cars you used to play with where you kind of pull back on it and you let go and it zips away.
Kind of.
Similar idea.
And so as the watch is ticking, that spring is just slowly unwinding, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's like a whole pressure situation.
Yeah, to an extent.
It's like momentum.
Yeah.
And so whenever a watch is like no longer like ticking, it's completely wound itself out. So then you just have to
rewind it
back up, and then it tightens back up, and then it lets itself back out.
So I read about this a little bit, and this is what I have a hard time wrapping my head around is it just like an Isaac Newton situation where it's like an object in motion stays in motion? Like, why don't you have to wind up your clock or your watch every, however many minutes or whatever? Like, how can you possibly wind up enough for it to keep going for days and days and days and days or whatever?
So part of it depends on like how long that spring is. And so...
And I guess it's not like quickly releasing all of that.
Oh, it's very slow.
Yeah. So that makes more sense.
It's very slow. And so like oftentimes when you're looking at watches, or if you've ever bought a watch, you may know that there's this thing called a power reserve. And essentially, if it has a longer power reserve, that means you could wind it all the way and it would take that amount of time for it to stop. And so some people really like that because it's like, well, I don't have to set the watch all the time or like wind it because that gets frustrating. But that is also where automatic watches came from. So you've got mechanical watches and then you've got automatic watches.
And automatics are battery.
No.
Okay.
They're not. So
then what are they?
Automatic.
No comment.
Essentially what they do is they
that where you wind your hand?
Yeah. They
like
put
your
a rotor.
Popeye?
They put a rotor in it. And what that rotor does is as you go throughout your day, you swing your arm when you walk, or as you do normal things, it builds up energy. And so it makes the watch battery like system. I say battery, but like its length of time, it extends it. So if you wear the same watch every single day and it's an automatic watch, it has that rotor, you may not ever really have to reset it because it's constantly like building power with that rotor. And the watch that I just passed around that has one of those rotors.
Show and tell.
And so
is that the thing that I'm seeing that's moving really quickly?
Yep. It like kind of bounces back and forth. Yeah. So it's on like a pivot in the very middle of the watch and it like spins. And so that's the rotor. And
also like, let me just tell you, because you're not here looking at this watch like I am, these little gears that I'm seeing in here, they are tiny.
They're so
Super
they
tiny.
look like the width of a piece of paper.
Itty bitty.
I mean, they are small little mechanisms.
So now because of that, let's just hop into a world full of Haylies and Libbys.
Yeah.
Do you think we could create such a product? And if we could, because I already see your face.
She sees me like licking my lips like, girl.
But if we could, do you think that we could ever get it that small?
My instinct is to say no. I feel like whenever you ask me questions about what things are like in an awful world, I just deeply sigh.
I know. You either sigh or you laugh.
My gosh.
And I'm like, this is what we're here for, Libby. We got to be able to do things.
No, I know. So that's tough because I definitely am a type of person that likes to tinker with things. Like if you have a knot in your necklace, I will do everything I can to get that knot out for you.
Wow, good for you. I will pick at it for 30 seconds before I hand it to Ty and say, fix this before I scream.
You can't take it. But that's the problem is like, what is my threshold before I'm like, these are so small. I cannot handle this anymore. And I like immediately what I think of always is jewelry, because like I have these tiny little piercings in my ear, and the backs on them, trying to get those backs on, like my boyfriend had to help me a few weeks ago. I am not kidding you when I say he got out a pair of needle nose pliers because neither of us could like grip it well enough to screw it into the, you know, the little earring piece. And it took us like 15 minutes, and my ear was like the color of the, you know, dirt on Mars after the end of it. It was so red and irritated. And it's just like, that is the most frustrating thing. So how well could I like tinker with these tiny little pieces before I'm like, fuck it, I can't take it anymore.
Because now here's the thing is like, I love to tinker and I love to do, I love things that are tiny. And I definitely think we would be like, you know, it would be cuter as a smaller version than this.
Yes.
Because everything's small. Everything that's small is like cuter, you know? Why wouldn't it be? But I just don't think that we could figure out the clock.
No.
I don't know that I would I don't think that I would create a gear. I don't think that there's any version of Haylie that would be like, you know what we need are gears and springs and wires.
Let me hit you with this though. If we develop a wheel, could we develop a gear? Because really that's all a gear is two wheels with corresponding notches in them.
That transfer energy.
Yes, that are propelling. I really think that we should do a physics episode.
Oh my God,
and I think it'll
so
be
hard.
Hysterical because
I think I might cry.
I don't understand physics now.
No.
But really, this is like, I understand this is what like makes a clock work. And like the same thing with the pendulum on, you know, a grandfather clock. It's the same theory of motion. It's like Newton's, you know, balls.
Yeah, those little clickety clacks.
It's the same sort of theory going into that. It's just, would we be able to observe and understand how that works?
Yeah, I think there are things like that we would see them, we would observe them, we would be like, that's a thing, but I don't know that we would verbalize it.
Yeah,
to the extent
of creating things like gears.
Yeah. Because here's the thing, you're like, oh, a wheel, and then a gear is just like a wheel, and I was like, in my brain, I immediately was like, yeah, a gear is like a wheel with shoes on. I'm like, what does that mean?
I mean, you're not wrong, though. It's like got these notches on it. And it like kind of is like walking. Right? Yeah. It's like,
and they're just
along.
Kind of like hitching a ride on each other. I don't know if there are two.
I don't know.
Just made like a window
like a very
wiping.
It's that like windmill
dance.
Yeah. Now we're all doing it. It's really funny.
Alt text. We're all just like window wiping.
Nobody hit their mic stands. Damn it.
That's my line.
That is Ty's line. Don't you do that. Through gritted teeth.
Always doing it.
He's never saying it through gritted teeth.
No.
He's the nicest human ever.
He just gives us these big eyes like, don't do that again. Please.
Yes, don't. But also I just want to say like, okay, so the watch that Ty passed around, in our little show and tell, he said, watch this. So it's like I would say a very like standard size of a men's watch. Think about like, I have a couple of my great grandmother's watches. These things are tiny.
Yeah, like old school women's watches.
Like the daintiest little, I mean that, and I'm looking at the gears in that watch that Ty brought, and I'm like, holy crap. And you're talking, we're going even smaller than something like that. That's insane.
And what's funny is, so Ty's always like, should I buy you a watch? Because, I don't know that we said this at the beginning when we introduced Ty, but he not only is our guest and our producer and all these things, but he is my husband.
Yep.
What?
I don't think we ever said that.
I am just now hearing this for the first time. Oh my God. Nepotism.
That's right.
Kidding.
But, when he's like, do you want a watch? Like, I'll buy you a nice fancy watch. And I'm like, don't buy me a fancy watch. I'm not going to wear it.
Don't bother.
If I do, it's just jewelry. I'm not going to look at it because I only like the little dainty ones. And then the dial, like the face is so small that I can't.
You can't read it?
I can't. Well, I can read it, but it's just like the minutes. the sections for the fives or whatever are so tiny that I'm like, would that be like 42, 43? Like it's so small. So I'm like,
I don't know.
And I hate to round. I want a precise number. So, you know, I'm like, it's so small. And then I'm like, and that's just the face. Who knows what's ticking in there, you know? What's holding it together?
Hey, listener, if you're in the Indianapolis area looking for warm photos of you and your loved ones, you're going to want to check out Hey Blondie. Hey Blondie is committed to capturing people from all walks of life through all stages of life, from a new baby to graduation. Check out HeyBlondiePhoto.com for more information and give them a like on Facebook and Instagram at Hey Blondie Photo. Now here's something, an interesting question I have for you now that I'm thinking about it. Do you think that we would have, if we were to come up with watches in an awful world, do you think that they would have 24 numbers on them or only 12? Assuming we're going by this whole 12-hour... You know what I mean? Because it's kind of weird, right?
That's true. Because I was like, no, they wouldn't have 12 or 24 because we're not using that system.
Right.
But we also haven't come up with a better system
No,
or any system at all. I think we would go with the tens system.
Yeah.
I know that it's longer, but like we wouldn't know any better.
That's true.
You know? So
But I'm just curious, like even in like, do you not think it's kind of weird that we opted to go for this? Like, okay, yes, we're going to have a 24-hour day. 12 hours,
but you're
12
just doing
hours.
It twice.
Yeah, it's weird.
It is.
People are like, well, at 1 p.m. or 1 a.m.
Yeah,
you know?
That's true.
And you have to say that. Now, in the military, no troubles.
But I also hate military time.
God, you know why I hate it? Because it goes off of 12s. So I always want like 1,400 hours. I want that to be 4 o'clock, but it's not.
Yes.
It's not. It's 2 o'clock.
And then I'm like, well, now I have to do math because now I have to be like 12 plus whatever.
And whenever I have to do math, immediately I'm angry.
Yeah. And then I shut down.
Yeah. I get that. I understand. It makes sense, but I don't want it to make sense.
Yeah. Because
it makes me think too hard.
Because I know if you're like 1,700 hours, then
you're like, oh my God.
You're like,
12,
okay, that makes
5 and the 7. And
like if you just know those, then you just know those. That makes sense. But otherwise, you're like, okay, this 12. What would be
7,
plus 5? So it's 5.
Yes,
it's 5 p.m.
p.m. Yeah.
Right? Where like,
because 500 hours is 5 a.m.
Right. And I'm like, that is kind of what plays out in my brain because otherwise I'm like, just say a.m. or p.m. At the end, you psycho. Like that.
Plus, how many times in your life have you done this? Or is it just me where you're like 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4?
Yes.
How many hours was that? Oh, okay.
Constantly.
Don't even get started on the half hours.
Ugh.
Yeah. Yeah. It becomes so stressful. So I don't know. Maybe I feel like we would be like here if we're doing a 10-hour day and then there's 20 hours in the day. I feel like we would just kind of be like, here's 20 numbers on your watch. But then maybe we'd be like, yikes. That's hard to read.
Well, but isn't it interesting too that like, I'm just thinking of this for the first time. Like it actually, I'll give the Babylonians and the Egyptians credit as always. I do. I love them. But how well it breaks down for minutes. Because, you know, we don't have separate minutes. You just know that if the minute hand is on the 12, then it's the top of the hour. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then, you know, 5, 10, 15, 20. But then it's like.
But it would do that again if we did it by hundreds.
That's true.
It would.
That is true. You're right.
The only thing
it would just have to be bigger.
This is where the Babylonians think we're right. But again, I don't know because math was just made up. So don't quote me on that, but that's how I feel, is that they used the angle system with the 60, and that's why we have the minutes that we do. And then they used the angles to come up with the longitude, the longitude and latitude. And that is, they used the Great British,
the Greenwich, whatever.
Yes, the observatory.
Yes,
or whatever.
And they're like, and this is 0 or whatever.
Yes, they were like, we
is
fixed the
median.
The longitude.
Don't look at me.
It's the longitude because the latitude is the sideways one.
Yes.
Because it's like the ladder. That's what we were taught in school.
Oh, I'm a Jimmy Buffett fan, and he has a song called "Changes in Latitudes, Changes in Attitude." So it's like when you go south, where it's warmer, you feel better.
But eventually, if you keep going south, it gets colder again.
That is true.
So it doesn't work.
Oh.
Only
Don't
if you're
hate
in the
on Jimmy Buffett
northern
like that.
hemisphere that works.
Well, fine.
But they like used all the math, and they were like, hey, with clocks and this 60 minute situation, we just like fixed longitude and latitude. And I'm like, well, that's a made up system too. So
So fuck you and your protractor.
that's right. So this is me saying I don't think that we would figure out longitude and latitude because I don't think we'd figure out the clock. And you know what? Maybe we would figure it out on our own without it because it's a made up system.
It is a made up system. And we'll talk about it more in a geography episode
Oh, yeah.
and like a cartography. We'll get to it.
Yeah, we'll get to cartography.
Yeah.
But
So anyway, back to watches.
Yes.
Okay. So here's some things I read.
Okay.
By the 19th century, clocks and watches are mass produced.
Mhm.
But again, still really, really, really expensive. And I'm curious if Ty knows kind of when it became such a necessary thing for us for people to have timepieces of their own that they can use. There's like a couple of like specific events that really fueled this, at least in the Western hemisphere of the world.
I'm going to take a stab at it. But was it during a war?
Yes.
It's always a war.
Yeah.
What is it good for? Making watches. Say it again.
We like to sing on this show.
We really do.
Yes.
Honestly, Elvis Presley was
I
just
also
in the
did something
room
that
for
I
it.
tell you both not to do, and that's slam on the table. But
You know what? Sometimes things require slamming your hands on the table.
sometimes they do.
So by the time the Civil War came around, we're like, we need a way to be able to coordinate
Civil War.
our American
See, I was
Civil
thinking
War.
like World War I, World War II.
Now we're getting there because there's some interesting facts about that as well. So you're on the right track, but it was the Civil War, which makes sense because it's the 1860s, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're like, we need to be able to find ways to coordinate our, warfare.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different. We're all like warfare is. Maybe we'll do an episode about that. I'm not confident that war would be a thing in an awful world because
I was just going to say,
we're peaceful
I've listened
people.
I listen to all these episodes because
You
I
have?
listen to them and then I edit them and things like that. But war in an awful world?
No.
I'm
Not a
just
thing.
saying 100% of wars have been started by men.
That is so true.
So true.
We are very peaceful people. I don't think a lot can be achieved via war.
Yeah, very pacifist.
Yes.
Kinda,
and so I don't think war would be a thing in an awful world.
No.
But I do think, for my limited knowledge of warfare, that it is something that has become progressively more advanced in the last 150 years.
Yeah.
Yes.
Since the time of the Civil War, especially like, Civil War happens, and that's certainly like getting a little more creative with like actual operations and things. But by the time like World War I comes around, we're like trench warfare and like coming up with those sorts of things. But they needed watches to be able to coordinate like these like covert operations that they, were now coming up with amongst this big group of people. So up until that point, men had pocket watches. Obviously, a small thing, tuck it in your pocket. It's real fancy looking. It's cute. Wristwatches were thought to be strictly for women.
I knew that.
Isn't that weird?
I knew that. Yeah.
That is like
weird.
such a feminine thing, which is crazy to me because now it's mostly men that wear wristwatches.
Do you think that wristwatches were for women because men took our pockets?
I don't know why you're looking at me.
Because you're the only man in this room?
What an astute observation, though, Haylie.
I'm just saying, they had pockets. We still, 2024, barely have pockets.
Yeah, that's true.
So-
like so much that it's a thing where like, and it has pockets.
Yes.
Whenever something has pockets.
In a
fault.
An awful
yeah,
world.
or a fought world, a world full of ties. I would never have taken your pockets away. Just
Thank
I
you.
appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Thank you. We need space to store things.
That's right. In an awful world, we would we would all have pockets.
Yes, of course. So they were super feminine until World War I.
Yeah.
And then they needed to be modified to, it's too hard to carry all your gear and be keeping track of your pocket watch. So they're like, wouldn't it be nice if we just put it on our wrists? And the women were like, yeah, that's what we've been doing this whole fucking time, you losers. And so wristwatches became more of a manly thing.
Because women are always right.
That's right.
It's so refreshing to have someone who knows how the world works in the room. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I thought that was so interesting though.
That is fascinating.
Like I really, because when I think of wristwatches, I think of men. It is such like a, like men love wristwatches. Not that women don't, but it's certainly less of a thing for women to be interested in wristwatches like men are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the men's watches they get
bigger,
so big and so bulky. And it's like such a big thing. Like Ty is a huge James Bond fan.
What?
And with every new movie, there's always a new watch. And then there's, you know, the anniversary watches. And it's such a big thing. And he's constantly like, oh, let me show you the new watch. Let me show you the new watch. And all of these things.
What does he wear? A Tag Heuer? I don't know.
In the 80s, he did.
I knew some things. More than a hat rack right here. What does the Daniel Craig James Bond, what type of watch does he typically go for?
Omega.
I knew that.
I knew you did. I thought you were making a joke.
No, Haley's staring at me, and I was like,
I kind of
no,
did too. I thought you were just setting
Omega.
me up so that I could say that.
I actually had temporary amnesia and forgot that it is Omega. Yes,
I was
because
like,
everyone's like Omega,
talk.
And I'm like, no, it's Omega.
Yeah,
you're wrong.
Yeah. I say it that way just because James Bond says it. But,
and James Bond is right.
Yeah. So it's interesting too if you like really look at like big watch companies like Omega or Tag Heuer or Rolex. 1880s usually, like I feel like that's like around the time that they popped up.
Yeah. And what is so crazy now, I think that, and people who aren't familiar with kind of like the industry and things, well, one, styles become, you know, trends happen, right? Like huge watches, like within the past several years were huge. No pun intended. Now,
let's face it.
Now that like the trend is moving away from that. Like people are getting sick of the larger watches, and they are going towards smaller watches. The watch I passed around to you is a 35 millimeter, which is smaller for a traditional men's watch.
Yeah, they're normally like 40
standards,
42,
usually
somewhere.
like 40. But older watches, men's watches, like 38 was kind of like the standard size. That's really popular right now. Is like that smaller form factor. But even watches like Rolex or Omega, they were tools. They weren't really like luxury status symbols when they originally were released. So like, I mean, back even in like the 60s, in the 70s, like a Rolex was not an inexpensive purchase, but it was something that kind of the everyday man had.
Like you need it. It's a necessity to have.
Exactly. And you know, then there's all different types of watches. So you've got like a field watch, you've got your dive watch,
a stopwatch,
exactly.
Whatever.
Yeah. And they were tools.
Yeah.
I mean, not only to read time, but they say like divers,
they can do other things.
They could save them from running out of oxygen underwater. And there's
or like measuring depth
for that, measuring depth, those types of things. And it really wasn't until like the 90s and the 2000s that like they started using more precious metals and they started becoming like status symbols and other things, which is why Rolex is so almost unattainable for like 90% of people.
Yeah. Now, watches, I have a question because all those big brands, they're all like Swiss, aren't they? Do you know why like the Swiss are so known for watches? Because when we have done all our timekeeping stuff, the Egyptians invented the sundial and they invented the water clock. And then the pendulum came from like Britain. And then the Americans fixed something with keeping things more constant, like keeping time better. And yet somehow the Swiss are like the watch people.
Yeah, they are.
When they are not anywhere near the inventors of timekeeping at all.
Right.
And ironically, they're the people that stay out of the wars. So,
Mhm.
you know what I mean?
They're like, I'm sorry, we're too busy making watches and chocolate.
I was going to say chocolate.
Can't.
Yeah. But the people are like, but we need the watches to coordinate our operations against the other bad people.
They're like, we will just make your watches.
We'll stay out of it.
We'll give them to whoever at
Take
the
some
end.
chocolate, take a watch, calm down.
Yeah. Maybe with your watch, you can count to 10.
Take some deep breaths.
That's right.
Yeah.
Eat
Pretend
some
you're blowing out a
chocolate.
candle in the Hall of Candles.
That's right. And then you'll just decompress, and then we won't go to war. And then we won't actually need all these fancy washes because we won't be at war.
Yeah. Believe it or not, it was a war. Why the Swiss are
Really?
kind of, yeah.
Okay, tell us more.
So Protestant refugees, including Huguenots, were fleeing the French wars of religion.
Okay.
And they were known for their watchmaking skills. Because
Okay.
that was just kind of where that was ground zero for watchmaking, right? It was kind of in Western Europe. And so this Reformation led to a variety of different things to happen. And so goldsmiths and jewelers had turned to watchmaking. Because there's all these stupid bans and other things that happen. They're like, oh, you can't do this or you can't do this with jewelry making and things like that. And so a lot of people at that time that were jewelers just had taken to watchmaking. And so it just kind of advanced in things from there. And so they're so renowned now as the watchmakers of the world. Japan's really come up in that.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Japan's a huge watchmaker.
I had no idea.
And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But Switzerland, primarily just because they have the history, they have the time that they dedicated to actually making the watches. And there's just when people talk about Swiss watches, they're like, oh, it's just they're made so well because they have all this history and this time and things that they had put into them. But the Japanese really started developing their own watches too, whenever they started getting introduced to the Western world. And part two kind of why Japanese watches were made so popular was because of the quartz crisis.
Okay.
In the 80s.
I am
70s,
so
80s.
excited to talk about quartz.
Yeah.
I don't understand how quartz watches work. So I'm going to need you to explain that to me.
Yeah. What does the quartz do?
So it's a quartz battery.
Oh.
Of quartz.
Yeah. So it's a quartz battery.
Did you say of course?
Yeah.
So mechanical watches are in such short form compared to quartz watches today because they're cheaper to make. And they use a battery so you can set it and forget it. And then if it goes dead, you just change the battery.
Okay.
So that was super appealing during in the 80s and things. So if you're familiar with watch history, there was this thing called the quartz crisis. And so it was about quartz taking over the watch industry.
Oh, not we're running low on quartz.
Exactly.
Which is what I definitely was thinking.
So a lot of mechanical watches started going by the wayside. And so the entire industry was freaking out because they're like, well, people aren't buying mechanical watches because they're just buying a bunch of quartz watches because they can mass manufacture them like crazy. They can just get them out the door. And so that's why in the 70s and 80s, if you look at watches, they look very futuristic. They really leaned into that millennium, whatever. But I bought another example of a quartz watch that I actually own that has a skeleton face so you can see through. So you can actually see the movement. But there's no actually moving parts.
Yeah.
In it other than whenever you're setting the time. So you pull the crown out and you move it and there are gears in there that moves the hour and the second hand. But on the bottom of the watch, there is a quartz battery that connects to, I think a copper wire that's wrapped really, really tight. And then that power gets transferred between the battery and the copper because it conducts electricity really well, and then that actually transfers into the little gears. So then they move.
Now,
Interesting.
my question is: are quartz watches really known for keeping the time super well, being super accurate?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
They actually keep time better than a mechanical
yes.
watch.
Okay.
I have some fun things to say about that later.
Yeah. So Haylie, you mentioned a balance spring earlier.
Yes.
So the balance spring is part of what helps keep the watch regulated. It keeps it regulated, right? So it's actually like this tiny little hairspring that's wound in a circle. And whenever you actually look at a watch, which is the other one that I have, you can kind of see it. It kind of goes like in and out, and in and out, and in and out. And so that balance spring is what helps keep the watch kind of regulated. And so that way it continues to tell the time. But if a mechanical watch gets unregulated, it may like go too fast or too slow, and so it's not as accurate. And that's why watches also are not friends to magnets, because you got these metal parts, and if they get magnetized, then it'll like start telling the time way too fast, and you may not really know it unless you have a reference point. Which, like, you know, if I didn't have my iPhone to like tell me what the time was, then I wouldn't know. And my watch has definitely been like magnetized. I mean, everything has magnets in it. My fridge has magnets in it, which is annoying, but I love to wear my mechanical watches, but I never stick my left hand in the fridge because I'm worried that it's going to magnetize my watch, which is really stupid, right? But
it's not stupid, but it's something that's never occurred to me before.
And quartz watches don't have that problem.
Right.
See, now when I think of quartz watches, I only think of Friends. Because I'm always thinking of the show Friends. But it's the episode where Ross's son is being born, and he's like trying to keep time for Carol's breaths. Yeah, and the contractions. And he's like, my watch is quartz. And then Susan is like, my watch is Swiss quartz. Ha ha. And that's always what I think, because I'm like, so Swiss quartz, that must be super accurate. That's all I know. And I know literally nothing more than that.
So let me tell you about a rabbit hole I went down a few years ago. And I'm going to bring up something that I brought up on the podcast before, which is the film Interstellar.
Yes.
So if you've ever watched Interstellar, you know, I've already talked about the plot of it. And if you don't know the plot, look it up, because I don't want to talk about all of it.
It's practically WALL-E.
Yes, it is. Except we're trying to really find a better place that's sustainable for people, right? So they go and visit these different planets that are way far away in the solar system. And on some of these planets, time moves differently than it does on Earth. So, like, you know, by the time Matthew McConaughey makes it back to Earth, his daughter is like in her 80s, but he still looks like his lovely Matthew McConaughey, because time is all relative, right?
All right.
All right. So there are these things called atomic clocks, which are the most accurate clocks in the world. And they are, they use quartz crystal to achieve greater stability, like Ty was talking about, so that they can keep track of time better. So the most accurate clock is called where is it? NIST F1 Celsium Fountain Clock. And it will not lose or gain a second for approximately 20 million years. That is how wildly accurate it is.
That's super cool, but that watch needs some rebranding on its name.
For sure. But they use it for space things. It's not like, have you seen my new NIST F1 Celsium Fountain watch? Like, it's not like a watch. It's an atomic clock. So, like, if you go read about atomic clocks, NASA has a whole webpage about it. But the reason I fell into this rabbit hole a few years ago after watching Interstellar is because I was like, does time really work like that? And we've been able to confirm that it does because of atomic clocks. So, like, it's very, very minuscule, but the farther you are away from a source of gravity, time moves faster. So, like, they were able to confirm this at some point, and I didn't do more research on this. I just remember this from a few years ago. That, you know, using an atomic clock, it's very, very, very small. But when you are in a high-rise building, time technically moves slower than it does if you were on the first floor.
That gradual. Like,
yes. It's wild. And it is so not, I mean, it's not enough to throw it off.
Right.
Like, I mean, we're talking
like
even more than milliseconds.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's that much smaller. But so, like, time, you know, as you get closer to like a black hole, moves slower, I think that's right, because it's closer to a source of gravity that's pulling it in. So like that theory of relativity and everything, it's so wild to me, but that is how they use like that's the clocks they use for space, because you're in a place that has no gravity, or if you're going to sending something to Mars or something like that where it's different gravity, then we need to be able to accurately track time. And so they use these atomic clocks that have quartz in them.
Interesting. Now, weird question, and I don't know that you would know, and
Probably
I don't
not.
think
Go ahead.
that we would ever figure it out. But would we age differently, though? Is gravity part of aging? Is that what just like is making us age?
No, but it's about the passage of time. So like, this is a really weird, so it's like, this is so strange. It's such a strange idea to talk about, but it is really addressed in that movie.
Because I just kind of think that
age.
like, right. But I'm also like, yeah, but the passage of time there is different. But like the passage of time for your earthly body would still be Earth's passage of time. Right. So like, wouldn't you still age? You have an Earth body.
I think you do still age, but I don't think you age at the same rate that you would have. But I don't know why that is. Like, it's something I can't really wrap my head around. But because of the way, I don't know if you would physically not age. Let me say that, like it is in the movie. But I do think it's like something about like, this is so silly, but I feel like I've read something about it. I've done zero research on this specific thing of late. So if you're listening to this, do not take this as Bible.
We are not scientists.
We are especially not physicists.
And we're not STEM girlies, as we have mentioned several times.
No.
Ty is also not a STEM girly.
That's right.
So there's a congresswoman. I don't know why this is specifically what comes to mind. There's a congresswoman, Gabby Giffords is her name, and she was actually like shot several years ago. Yeah. Her husband is an astronaut. And he has spent so much time in space that I think he's like technically, younger than her because of the amount of time he spent in space or something.
Interesting.
So I don't know if it's necessarily a physical thing. I think that's a theory that's never obviously been able to be tested because who's going to volunteer to like, yes, I will go sit up in space for 50 years or whatever. Right. But I do think because technically time is slower in space, that you come back and you're younger.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah.
So I think that's what it is, but I don't think that we've been able to actually test this theory of physically do you age like that in the same way.
Well, I'm just here to say for In an Awful World, I just do not see us figuring out the math for clocks to know how space-time is.
Girl, I don't know. I'm not sending anything to space.
No.
First of all, we'll be talking about architecture in the near future, I believe.
Yes.
But are we going to figure out how to even make a high rise? Not confident, says I.
Jumping back into space really quick, can I tell a little fun fact?
Please, because I love facts about space, especially.
So, Haylie, I know you have either of you or maybe even listeners heard of the Moon Watch?
No.
Yes.
Okay. So the Moon Watch was made by Omega. It is a chronograph, which if you're going deep down, like this is a very, very complicated watch that can track time, right?
Yeah, explain a chronograph for the listeners because we totally know what that means.
Yeah,
but like,
absolutely. I am constantly talking about chronographs. It's like a party topic.
Yes, she never stops.
Party trick. A chronograph. So whenever you're talking about like features on a watch, usually those are referred to as complications because they are.
I know. I heard that.
Right. So a chronograph usually has like two extra little pushers like on the watch, and so it has an extra hand, and whenever you click it, you can like track time. So they're usually used in like racing.
Okay. Makes sense.
So like a car's going so fast, they want to lap it. Yeah. They use it in like sports. We're clearly sports people. They use it. The Olympics is another reason like why Omega is like a huge sponsor of the Olympics. They track the time and everything. So like whenever they're doing like sprints or whether, they're tracking the time of whoever's faster or even like swimming, they can like anytime that a swimmer like gets to the end, they like lap it. That's a chronograph technically that's being used whenever they're doing that.
I'm following what I already knew about chronographs.
So the Moon Watch is a chronograph. And the reason it's called the Moon Watch is because it was the first watch that was worn. So Omega actually provided the watches that astronauts landed on the moon with.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. And for Apollo 11, whether or not you've seen the movie.
And if you haven't, you should.
Yes. So whenever they were trying to get back to Earth, one of their thrusters like broke or something, right? So it wasn't working correct. So they had to actually expel energy in another way so that they could like essentially
thrust themselves back
to Earth. They had to do that at a very specific time. And the astronaut that did that tracked it, I think it was like 11 seconds and so many, he did that on an Omega Speedmaster, which is so referred to as the Moonwatch. And in the movie, they used one as a prop. So if you go back and watch it, you'll see they get a nice little shot of him actually like timing it and things.
Yeah.
But that watch saved their lives.
That is so cool.
Isn't that crazy?
Cool.
And I'm assuming it's a quartz powered.
No.
Really?
I don't think so. I think it was
It's a mechanical?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So maybe that predates our understanding of how quartz is much more stable.
And this is also why a lot of luxury watches like Rolex and Omega are so expensive because and this is why I'm so fascinated with them, the craftsmanship that goes into actually making sure that those are as accurate as possible. Like, yeah, you can go to Macy's and you can probably buy like a mechanical watch.
Dinky little
Is
watch.
it going to run as well as an Omega? No, you're going to get what you're going to pay for.
Yeah.
But they have put so much time and attention. Like those watches can be anti-magnetic. Those watches are going to be accurate to like so many milliseconds or whatever.
Right.
They're really like beautiful things. I mean, seriously.
Which is why I think they're so fascinating.
Yeah.
Like, yes, my love like introduced Scott with James Bond. Like James Bond is so synonymous with watches. But like the more that I like learned about the watches and things like that, I started to have this appreciation for more and more watches because I was like, it is amazing. These little things can do. And they've actually saved people's lives.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's cool.
It's the fact that we truly live and die by time.
Yeah.
And to have, I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing that we in this regular world have developed these amazing tiny little mechanisms that, and like everybody wears them, you know, whether it's an Apple Watch or a regular mechanical watch or a quartz watch or whatever, that I feel like we've lost our appreciation for how remarkable it is a little bit.
Yeah. I think we take it for granted.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Especially because going back to a world full of Haylies and Libbies, I just don't know how precise we would be and
Not
things
this
like that.
precise.
And so when you think about it that way, to be like, hey, if we were in charge and we had to come up with this, could we? Would we?
Not confident.
I'm just not confident that we could, not in this kind of situation. And it's just like you gain a new appreciation for them.
For how amazing and precise some of these, you know, Omega and Rolex watches are. And then to have an atomic watch that's not going to be off by even a second for 20 million years.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Which is wild. My car is off by a full minute, like once a week.
Right? Yes. So true.
I can hardly time melting butter in the microwave without
Right?
it just becoming a solid liquid.
We rely on it so much for so many things. Yeah. So timekeeping is fascinating. I don't have any other notes on it. I just, the physics of it, it blows my mind. It really does.
It is super wild. And so I think that is it on timekeeping. So thank you so much for being our first guest. We do have one final question for you.
Okay.
In a world full of Haylies and Libbies, would you be a Haylie or a Libby? And why?
That's a good question. So I think I'm a little bit of a mix of both of you. And maybe that seems a little bit like a cop-out answer.
So you'd be like second gen.
Because eventually the Haylies and the Libbies are gonna become interwoven.
That's right.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I'm very visual like Haylie is, very creative and those types of things, but also like I'm a little more daring like Libby.
I'm daring? Oh shoot. Whew.
I think so. I listened back to the episodes. I think you're a little bit more
because I'll go pick up the
like if
animal
somebody's
skull.
going to fall off an edge first, it's going to be a Libby.
That's so true. Which
Taking
is
one for
crazy
the team
because I am terrified of that sort of thing.
Same.
But yes, probably, and some of that would be owed to just my clumsiness. But
all right. Well, I love it. Well, again, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, it's been so exciting to be on this side of the microphone,
Yes.
or actually in front of a microphone. But I've been looking so forward to actually being. Like,
we've been looking forward to it
on the pod with you both, and many exciting things to come, and just happy to be doing this whole thing. So
Yeah. And we'll definitely have more guests on in the future. I'm sure we'll have you on again in the future. So if listeners, if you have ideas or people that you think should be on here, let us know.
Send us your thoughts too. Like send us your questions about what you wonder about in an awful world. And yeah, there's so many things that like haven't even occurred to us that are like, oh yeah, we should talk about that.
So if you have questions or even on past episodes, we can always like do a little segment to bring things back up. We've got an Instagram page and a Facebook page and there's YouTube. So leave us comments and interact with us and we will try to answer questions and do things like that.
And please like and subscribe to us on YouTube and Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Rate us if you can. Give us 5 stars. That really helps us. And yeah, just continue to check in with us every Friday.
Yeah.
Okay. So see you then, huh?
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.